We do. We have a quorum. Thank you so much for coming to the meeting today. As you know, this is one of the most important meetings in the history of our university. We're looking at some very challenging events today, not only those events, but the aftermath of those events and the actions that we will take as a Senate to go forward. First on the agenda is the approval of the minutes. We don't have an actual transcript of any of the minutes. You will be getting those in October. We did not want to take your time with that given the nature of this meeting. We have many, many motions on it, as you know. But we do have a transcription of the campus forum. So we hope that those of you who were not there will either make sure at some point to read that transcript or to look at the video. It's deeply moving. It was filled with some significant personal witness, as well as many very creative ideas that have inspired us over the last week to fine-tune the motions that you'll be looking at today. Next on the agenda is our university update, remarks by President Gottfredson, and he has to leave immediately after the remarks because he has another appointment, so there will not be questions.
Thank you. Thank you, President Kieran, and welcome back. In your role, and I know we have a very, very busy agenda today, and so I'll be brief, but there are things I would like to comment on and talk with you about. So I'll begin with a topic that remains at the top of all of our minds, and rightfully so, and that's the issue of sexual violence, intimidation on our campus. So this morning I had the opportunity to speak with Classified Staff Training and Development Advisory Committee, and the theme of their meeting was our commitment to end violence in our community, sexual discrimination, abuse, and harassment. Their agenda included tabletop discussions about how to support one another when we witness harassment or discrimination, ways to improve new mandatory online sexual harassment prevention training for faculty and staff, and other ways to create a safer and more respectful campus community. I was really encouraged to see that this was the theme they chose for their meeting, and I'm really glad these conversations are taking place. From the classified staff meeting this morning to the Senate forum here last week to the discussions that are ongoing across our campus. We're all talking about this issue, addressing it head on and collectively working to find solutions. Keeping the discussion front and center, acknowledging the problem, engaging in respectful discourse, and bringing our collective expertise to the problem. These are critical steps toward enacting the kind of deep cultural change that must take place on our campus. And there is much to do, even as we make some progress. When I arrived here nearly 2 years ago, I was surprised to learn that there was no mandatory sexual harassment prevention training for faculty and staff on our campus. And working in collaboration with the Faculty Advisory Committee, we began one. We can improve it, and Provost Coltrane is gathering data on that and the experiences with the campus, and others are evaluating that. That's good. We need to improve it, but it's a start. You know, I also discovered we didn't have an ombuds person on campus, and now we're very fortunate to have Bruce McAllister here, who you got to meet last week. Great addition to our campus. I appreciate very much all the hard work our colleagues in student affairs have done in addressing issues of sexual misconduct prevention response among our students, implementing a multidimensional strategy to address these issues from many different perspectives. I appreciate their receptiveness to ideas in the evaluations that have been done. For example, the Groves report and the implementation of that report's recommendations. We're making progress with a couple of the immediate measures I announced earlier this month. We're in the process of adding 2 more staff positions, aligned with the recommendations of the White House Task Force, to augment support for survivors. So the first, a sexual violence response and support services director, and that And that person will provide confidential support and advocacy for survivors, and an equal opportunity specialist and Title IX investigator in affirmative action. This position will help the increase in reporting of sexual assault and misconduct that we've seen recently. And we're very close to finalizing who will serve on the external review panel that I announced with Vice President for Student Affairs and the Athletic Director. This panel will examine our campus-wide efforts to prevent and respond to sexual violence, misconduct, and intimidation, and review our support services, our education efforts, our recruiting practices, and recent efforts to improve our code of conduct policies. We've received several suggestions from members of the campus community about the panel, and I thank you for that. The panel will be in place as soon as we can arrange schedules, and we're eager for them to get to work. We need to discuss things also that we can do right now, this summer, to support sexual violence prevention efforts and make our campus safer now. I find it immensely encouraging that there are so many individuals and groups who want to do this, who want to help, who are offering their ideas and their expertise. I know many of you here are deeply engaged in these efforts and discussions, and I thank you for that. Today, you'll be considering several changes to the Student Conduct Code that we believe will help improve the safety of our campus, including two that were recommended by the Groves Report that was commissioned by Student Affairs. One would extend the Code of Conduct jurisdiction off campus. The other would lower the standard of evidence, the burden of proof required in such cases. These changes are important, and I'm glad to see them up for consideration today. We will continue to work over the summer, along with many of you, and keep these conversations and discussions at the fore. They've been difficult, and they will continue to be. But the problem facing us is deep, complex, and will take an extended collective effort to address. I'm fully committed to that effort. I also wanted to talk with you today, and I'll take a moment in our busy schedule, to talk about the academic freedom policy, which was approved by the Senate last month. I've signed this policy. Thank you. Well, thank you. And I've outlined the context for my decision, a memo that I'm sending to the President later today, I think, which I trust he will share with you, I know he will, and which will be posted to my website. I want to provide you with some of the context for that decision. So this university has a long and exceptional history of very strong protections for academic freedom and freedom of speech. The University of Oregon has consistently been on the right side of this issue, and fierce protection of these freedoms is really part of our culture here. This is something to be very proud of. So currently, academic freedom at this university is protected by an OAR, 580-22005, to be precise. You all know that covers academic freedom for all of Oregon's universities. Representative faculty are also protected by Article 5 of the United Academics Collective Bargaining Agreement. And the university has additional policies, including the Community Standards Affirmation and the UO policy on freedom of inquiry and free speech. Taken together, they provide a very robust set of protections. So when I began working with the Senate about a year ago to draft a policy that would further strengthen these protections, and that was an activity that had been ongoing for some time before I arrived, my view was then, and has remained, that we could best accomplish that, further strengthening the protections, by including clarifications similar to those that have recently been adopted by other AAU universities, including the universities of California and Washington. So like those universities, I do favor, adding language explicitly recognizing that traditional academic freedom principles extend to speech concerning university policies. So this recognition is timely, and it ensures that academic freedom at the University of Oregon will not be narrowed by the United States Supreme Court's decision in Garcetti versus Ceballos. That's a very important addition to our policies, and I'm very, very pleased to sign the policy as a consequence. As I've said, research universities are absolutely dependent on these freedoms. That's why I approach this issue with care and deliberation, as you have, and it's why I am pleased to sign it today. I do believe that the University of Oregon has one of the strongest academic freedom policies in the country. Now, I thank all of you for your time and work that you've done on behalf of the university all year. There's much more to be done. There's a very, very busy agenda today to accomplish more, and I laud you for this activity and for your attention to these very, very important matters. And afterwards, I wish you all a very productive summer. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much. And I would like to ask anybody who contributed to the actual writing of the academic freedom and freedom of speech policy over the years to please stand up. We'd like to acknowledge you and thank you for your work. And thank you so much to President Gottfredson for signing. This is great news today for all of us. Thank you so much. Next, I'm going to see if the Senate would like to consider suspending the rules for the entire meeting so that visitors could make comments. Otherwise, we would have to suspend the rules for each motion as we go. Since we have very little time and a very busy agenda, would you possibly entertain such a motion now? If so, someone would need to make it and second it, and we'd vote.
Second. Now, this is just for participation.
Just for participation, not for voting, yes. As I said, so visitors could make comments, yes. Thank you. That's our parliamentarian who's doing a great job making sure that we are following all the rules. Thank you. So we've had Deborah Merskin makes the motion. Cassia Delabo seconds. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Visitors may make comments, and we'll have essentially a speakers list style for this meeting, so please raise your hands. We'll take you in order. The first motion that we're considering is the curriculum report, which we do at the end of each quarter. James Imamura, Chair of the Committee on Courses, will now present the report.
Yeah, it was about 2 weeks ago. It was posted online, and presumably you read it. And also,
If you want to speak in the microphone, please. Thanks so much.
and there was also a set of errata or an amendment made this afternoon. Can you show the amendment?
Here's the amendment.
It was basically stuff that was done after ICFR met to talk about
Redlined.
courses. Other than that, the report is as it was submitted. Anybody have any questions about our report?
Any questions? Cassia Delabo?
I just wanted to make a comment about the curriculum report that particularly this last month or two with the Senate being very focused on some large issues, I just want to go on record as saying I would like us to reconsider how we dialogue about the curriculum report because it's the core of the work we do and I feel we don't give it enough attention. And I'm not sure how we'll do that, but I'd love to do that. Think about that for next year. Just to make that comment, because this is very important work, and we tend to say, yep, great, and move on.
I think that's a very significant comment, and there are many ways for us to do that, starting with the Senate exec and then bringing something to the body for consideration. A way of doing that would be more effective. Thank you so much. We will do that, And I know that our wonderful Senate Executive Coordinator is putting that on the list. I'd like to take a moment just to thank her. It's been an incredible time putting the last few meetings together. Makes a big difference to have such wonderful documents to look at each time, and it takes a lot of work and a lot of effort. So, any discussion, further discussion before we vote? I'd like to call the question. All in favor? I don't think we need to read it because it basically just says, are we going to pass it or not? It's a very, very brief in this case. And it's something that we do every quarter. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay? So carried. Thanks so much for all of your work. This committee does an amazing amount of work. Thank you so much. Next on the agenda is the announcement of the spring 2014 election results, and you can see them posted here and go to the website to read them in detail. We had a strong response to our call for service this year, the largest number, at least in the last decade, of respondents, and probably since the inception of the Senate, which is great news for the entire university, and strong representation across all of the committees, and a great incoming Senate. So thank you all for your service. I'm going to move very quickly through some of these items. I'll apologize for the speed at which I'm doing this because we have so much on this agenda. Next is the announcement of the runoff elections. There were 3 ties, and then some other areas in which we needed to find more representation. So there will be a runoff election taking place shortly. Lisa could give us the details about that.
So we're planning on holding a runoff election beginning next Monday, June 2nd, and ending on Friday, June 6th at 5 p.m. So we'll be doing it in the same procedure as last time, sending out an email to the entire campus asking everybody to vote through DuckWeb. So please keep your eyes out and please vote.
And I'd ask you to please vote because we had 3 ties, and that's almost unheard of. And we really need to move forward on this. We need full representation, and also the other areas that we're still filling some seats and so forth. Next is the Senate Budget Committee, Interinstitutional Faculty Senate, and COIA representative elections. These will be done in the fall. We've done this in order to save time today. We simply didn't have time to run 4 elections. So Lisa will tell us the details.
So I don't really have that much to say about that except for that we'll be doing it via email. And those of you who were here earlier this year remember that we did the same thing with the Senate Budget Committee at the beginning of this year or in the middle of this year. So we'll be doing it the same way via email and in the fall. And also a note that the COIA election is done through the Senate Executive Committee. So,
thank you, Lisa. And next is the election of Senate President-elect Vice President. We have 2 candidates, Christopher Phillips from Math and Randy Sullivan, who is a lecturer demonstrator in chemistry. And Chris could not be here today, so I'm going to read his statement. Oh, we have a new statement. I apologize for not being here. I am at the Great Plains Operator Theory Seminar. This time it really is in the Great Plains, but last year it was in Berkeley, and a few years ago it was in Puerto Rico. Joaquin Lin keeps nominating me. He is my main research competitor here, and if he manages to get me elected, he will get a year ahead of me. More seriously, I see the visible part of the job of the Senate VP and President as trying to make the Senate run smoothly. They can get things considered that might fall through the cracks, but can't block issues or force particular outcomes. Some years ago, it looked like a Senate president promised a university president, not the current one, that something wouldn't pass, and was greatly embarrassed when it did. Regardless of the actual events, one thing is clear. This sort of promise is not for the Senate president to make. The Senate needs more visibility. In the current election, some seats will go vacant for lack of candidates. I served several terms in the Senate, and there wasn't even a good mechanism for communicating to my own department what the Senate did. Announcements at department meetings didn't work. We have too few. We could send a broadcast email after each meeting with a brief summary of what happened. I hate to add to bulk UO email, but this may be a good enough cause. Personal involvement of senators, and particularly the Senate President and VP, might help. Going to department meetings, phone calls, anything. Years ago, I spent time trying to recruit Senate candidates. Somebody needs to do that again, too. Like other universities, our administration is too big and expensive. Administrations are growing much faster than faculties, enrollments, courses taught, and research. I was appalled when not long ago an administrator broadcast message said that the UO administration had been growing more slowly than average, but still faster than teaching and research, and that this meant the UO was under-administered. For better or worse, MOOCs, massive online courses, are likely to be seriously disruptive. I have no prescriptions, but we can't ignore them. Some things are being done, but in at least some ways it is very primitive. My advanced course at the Fields Institute last quarter was broadcast live and got a significant remote audience. My graduate student is still there, but I wasn't able to even arrange to have him see the lectures for my course this quarter. I will use all the influence I can muster to get better spam blocking. There are well over 5,000 open access fake journals which charge large fees to publish junk. More and more of them spam far out of their areas. I get things about engineering, philosophy, and sociology, and work to evade spam filters. Central action can save us much time. Since the candidate's not here, we won't have questions, and the next statement will be made by Randy Sullivan, who is our other candidate. You may approach not the bench, but the podium. Into the docket.
Hi. I ride the bus with Chris, and I agree with everything he said, and we've talked about spam blocking, and we will, if you choose to elect him, I will work with him, and I should hope he would work with me if you choose to elect me. I'm not going to speak too long because we have a big agenda. Most of you, I think I've worked with a lot of you before, and here in the Senate and elsewhere, and so I'm sure you're aware of my weaknesses and perhaps you may consider some of my strengths. I think one of my abilities, at least from the feedback I get from other people, is when things are deadlocked, I can see a way ahead. And I think that's a valuable skill to have right now. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing and expecting different results. And I think we've been locked in that reactive pattern for some time. I see things beginning to change thanks to the current president and the recent past president's work, and the work of a lot of other people, and the new board. And the administration has been doing some things that I think are quite helpful. I think one of our biggest roadblocks is we underestimate a lot of times the extent to which that each of us, as we enter our constituencies, as faculty, as students, as members of the Greek life, as administrators, as members of the athletic community, we underestimate the ability to which that subculture indoctrinates us with a set of values. And we tend to see all the issues through the lens of our set of values. And we think that the other sets of values are mutually exclusive, but they're not. They're complementary. The drive for excellence that drives the athletic community is good. We can work with that. The sense of brotherhood and sisterhood in the Greek community is good. We need that. The sense of, oh man, the classified staff here, I've spent 14 years at this institution looking for that stereotypical living off the fat of the land classified government employee. I haven't found one. They are the hardest working crew I have ever seen, and all extremely dedicated. And that sense of service we all need. The sense of inquiry and the intellectual honesty that the faculty brings to the table. Those are good. We need that. The sense of efficiency and service that I see in the administrators. We need that. We fall into problems when we think that our values are the only values. We need to open up and listen to each other and look for places and realize that these values are not exclusive. They complement each other. We can only become an excellent university if we empower each other to be excellent in all of these constituencies. And that's what I'm going to work towards if you elect me.
Great. Thank you so much. If you'd like to remain at the microphone,
Should I stay here for questions?
we have time for questions. Please. Would anybody like to ask our candidate a question?
Good.
Seeing none, we will now vote. And as with our legislation relating elections of this kind, we vote by a secret ballot. Lisa is passing those out right now. Oh, no, you don't sign it. You just vote for either candidate. No signing. Here, she's got a few. We'll know. Anybody need a pen? No? Okay, why don't we collect the ballots, please? Great, and we're going to move along and we'll announce the results later. Well, we don't have a minute to spare. Our next motion is the Task Force to Address Sexual Violence and Survivor Support. The sponsor of the motion is Michael Dreiling, Professor of Sociology and UO Senator. And now if you would like to make the motion and then ask for a second. And then I'll read it, and then we'll have discussion, background and discussion. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I'd like to advance this motion.
Do I hear a second? Thank you. Deborah Merskin was second. And now I will read the motion, then we'll have background provided by Professor Dreiling if he wishes, and discussion. Section 1. Whereas sexual violence and sexual harassment at universities are part of a national problem. And yes? Oh, I don't think it does. Lisa. It does. So we'll just wind the clock back and ask if the Senate would consider suspending the rules in order to consider this motion. So moved. Gina Psaki was first and Senator Davison second. Discussion? Jennifer Ellis? Unfortunately, we can't do that with motions. We have to suspend per motion, and that's just the way it works. Sorry about that. So all in favor of suspending the rules, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. And now I'll read it. Whereas sexual violence and sexual harassment at universities are part of a national problem, and that these problems are also present at the University of Oregon. And 1.2, whereas the UO must take measures to address the problem of sexual violence and the needs of survivors of sexual violence on and off our campus. And 1.3, whereas many questions remain unanswered with the alleged sexual assault on March 8 through 9 and the university's response to that incident. And 1.4, whereas the UO's Student Conduct Code requires sustained and focused attention by students, the University Senate, and the University President as it relates to this matter, and that revisions to this code must be done through the UO Senate. And 1.5, whereas the university's financial commitment to ending sexual violence and supporting survivors of sexual assault, the UO, remains unspecified and without needed transparency. And 1.6, whereas the University Senate acknowledges the lack of transparency regarding recent cases of sexual assault and the lack of a university-wide initiative to fully engage all of the university community in efforts to reduce sexual violence on campus and off campus, and the limited support that has been provided to survivors of sexual violence, and acknowledges its obligation to address these problems, Section 2, 2.1. Be it hereby moved that a task force to end sexual violence and support survivors is formed to study the strengths and limitations of the university's response to recent incidents of sexual violence, and based on those assessments, to initiate sustained, proactive changes aimed at ending sexual violence and supporting survivors of sexual violence. And 2.2, be it further moved that this task force is formed no later than June 6, 2014, consisting of no fewer than 2 elected members of the University Senate, 2 other members of Senate constituencies, 2 additional nominees recommended by the UO-CESV, 2 students, and a member of the university administration, all to be appointed by the Senate President, and that the meetings of this task force shall be open to the university community except as required by privacy laws. And 2.3, and be it further moved that this task force shall work with the University Board of Trustees, the ASUO, the University President Administration, and the Senate's constituencies to report on initial findings and initial recommendations for action by the second Senate meeting of fall 2014. That would be the second Senate meeting in October, for your information. Sponsor Michael Dreiling, Professor of Sociology and UO Senator. Professor Dreiling, would you like to give us some background?
Yes, I will. Thank you very much. And thank you, everyone, for just sustaining the care and attention to this matter. This motion, as those of you who were at the last Senate meeting may recall, arose in part, I guess it was delegated that I take this on. I volunteered to draft the motion and submit it to the Senate listserv. So the language in this motion has been vetted and debated on the Senate listserv prior to the forum held last week, which it received additional changes through that process. While much of the structure of the motion remains the same, I do want to acknowledge that there was a fairly significant involvement on the part of the University Senate as well as the university community in kind of putting this together. I understand that there are still issues that might require tweaking, and I believe that's the job of this body to do. Upon the course of debate as we proceed here, I'm hoping that there will be new insights, things that bring us together around this common problem. I do want to make sure that I add to the reading of this, the interpretation, that in no way should, for example, Section 2, 2.1, the strengths and limitations of the university's response. I want to really be sure that everyone in this room understands that refers to all of us. I mean, really at a serious level. Obviously, there's an institution level, administrative level of decision making that we can all, choose to point fingers at. But there are any one of us could find fault in someone else in the community. And the point of this motion was to really draw together a concerted effort that the Senate and the shared governance apparatus of this institution could be brought into some focus to sustain and carry forward proactive resolution and action to really confront the challenges and the very complex task of really significantly changing the culture and practices of sexual violence and the impacts it has on survivors and the failures to provide for the students impacted by sexual assault and violence. So that's the general spirit of it, and I'll leave it there and just look forward to what you all do with this now.
Now we open the floor for discussion. I see Professor Kramer. Any other hands? Yes, you'll be next.
Well, I just wanted to say I think we've all reviewed it, and as far as I can tell, I'd like to call the question as soon as we can to move on to other things, because I think this is obviously a good move.
Thank you for your comment. Yes, please. And then you'll be next. And then Landrum, and then Chartoff.
I just have a question, and that's what would be the relationship, should we get down further on today's agenda and we talk about the proposed adding a class to the curriculum. I just want to know what, Michael, you think the relationship would be between the people that work on that and the task force, because it seems like there should be some dialogue between the two. Do you think? Why don't we bring this one here, and then if you need, because the next person will be there. Yes. No. She'd have to actually make the motion. Was that a motion? No. You were just saying you hoped. Yeah. You'd have to make it technically, and we'd, Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for that suggestion. I do believe that this task force or committee, I think I've heard other people refer to it, maybe preferring it be titled a standing committee or a task force, regardless of what we and the Senate ultimately decides here. This body could play, I think, a very central role in kind of working with the undergraduate council and other relevant bodies in making sure that the curriculum issues that have been raised really are thoroughly vetted and processed and considered in terms of resources, in terms of the feasibility, as well as the timing of implementing a mandatory multicultural requirement that would include topical materials related to sexual assault, violence, and harassment, as well as prevention. So I would be open, again, I'm kind of see myself sponsoring this in the spirit of the Senate, and I'm open to amendments that might make our job easier. And if someone were to make a motion to amend this to include a clause directing the task force to work with such a resolution to pursue this multicultural requirement, I would support it personally.
Yes, you're asking to make a comment related to Michael, so we'll allow that.
My understanding, 'cause I want to talk directly to that, is that I think it's 2.1, initiate sustained proactive changes aimed at ending sexual violence, supporting survivors. I am interpreting that line, and maybe if you want to strengthen it, to literally work with the student conduct code, the undergraduate count, all the parts that are moving right now related to this issue. And in my mind, this is putting a group together that will be proactive in terms of following up any initiatives that we're making to ensure that they don't just drop off the side or through the cracks. This group would be shepherding other things forward and make sure that all the people who spoke last week are involved in the conversation. This group would make sure all that happens. That's how I'm interpreting it.
By the way, also, I think when you were referring to an amendment, Michael, it could be something such as in 2.1, just a friendly suggestion, including all education initiatives or including working with just something very simple. It doesn't have to be a whole new point that we spend time crafting the wording. It's simple. If someone wants to do it, it would be fine. Pedro?
I'll be happy to move that we change the wording of point 2.1 to include language that specifies a mandate for this task force to include curricular changes and discussing it with the constituencies.
Where would you put it? Just
in point 2.1 at the end. Proactive
end.
Changes aimed at ending sexual violence and supporting survivors of sexual violence, including looking into curricular changes that might be required.
So including curricular changes and possible curricular changes?
Possible curricular changes.
Is that what?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll put this up here, and now we can have discussion on this. Randy Sullivan was first.
Okay.
This amendment sounds good on the face of it, but I think there might be unintended consequences. It's a very good and well-crafted motion the way it is. If we try to make it an omnibus bill, we may mess up good work. For one thing, the curriculum motion that we're going to be counting on soon sets a ticking clock for the what's usually a rather lengthy curriculum development, course development and approval process. You're adding one more layer to that. That's not going to speed things up. I think it is better to let the motions stand alone because, for, number one, the Senate can express its will separately on that, and thirdly, I'm afraid this might have the. Secondly, I would think this might have the unintended consequence of actually slowing down the process of implementing curriculum change by adding one more layer that it has to go through.
Okay, thank you for your comment. Yes?
This committee is free to work with that the undergraduate council
Right.
and other committees involved in the process.
Thank you. Other comments? We're discussing the amendment now, then we'll return to the motion. I saw some other hands. Were there other hands here that were up before? Pedro Garcia
Can I quickly
Cotto?
respond to that?
Please.
It sounds as if the task force's charge right now is vast, as it is indeed, and it's sort of wide open. But I think the fact that we specify that we want this task force to also look at this curricular change that is being proposed doesn't create two parallel processes, but it in fact unifies the approach that we want to take as a Senate. And so I think it is very useful to mention it here.
Thank you. Senator Schlegel.
Yeah, so I, as the sponsor, I think, of the other motion regarding curriculum, I would be in favor of somewhat combining and just having a new clause in Section 2 of this motion, but I think including possible curricular changes that might be required, it's a little too vague for me, and I would rather have a more concrete clause at the bottom, so I'll be voting no on this.
Okay. Good. Anybody else? Shall we vote on the amendment? I call the question. All in favor, please say aye. Opposed, nay? Nay. Back to the discussion on the motion. Senator Schlegel, then I saw Martinez, Landrum, Chartoff, Kramer.
Okay, so the kind of consensus that I was getting with the other motion that I sponsored is that it puts too much pressure on the Senate where it should be more of an undergraduate council thing, and that wasn't my intention. I just wanted to get the ball rolling. And so I would be in favor of adding a clause to this motion 2.4 saying, and be it further moved that this task force shall work with the undergraduate council, the committee on courses, academic departments, and the UO administration on proposals for mandatory courses regarding gender, sexuality, and social inequality to be presented to the Senate no later than winter term of 2015. And that's my proposed amendment.
Could you read that a little slower,
Yeah,
and we'll
sorry.
project that. It was beautifully read. Now a little slower tempo. Thank you.
Section 2.4, and be it further moved that this task force shall work with the undergraduate council, committee on courses, academic departments, and the UO administration on proposals for mandatory courses regarding gender, or addressing gender, sexuality, and social inequality to be presented to the Senate no later than winter term of 2015.
Thank you. Discussion on the amendment. Discussion on the amendment. Professor Kramer.
I think that sounds like a good addition to this, and I support it. I think that's a good way to unify the two efforts. Thank you.
Great. Other comments? Professor Dreiling.
Yeah. I kind of saw that as implicit in the task force, and I was really pleased to see when Senator Schlegel presented the motion to move forward a multicultural course requirement or some other course requirement.
Great. Other
And
I'm sorry.
hold on a second. There was a specific suggestion I have here. One is, it's been pointed out to me that we have twice, under 2.1, fourth line down. Or did you already get rid of it? You already got rid of it. Okay. It was there. The other point I wanted to suggest, and it won't fit in the context of this motion, but it's raised for the sake of discussion, which is it would make sense that an amendment follow this particular motion to include.
We can't.
I know. I'm
technically
raising this as discussion. I'm not raising it as a.
We can only talk about this amendment, but when we go back to general discussion. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
I'm just thinking about the workload for this task force, which would be a concern, and so I would like to just point out that there's a workload concern, and I'd like to raise that point later.
That's great. That's very helpful. Senator Slagle.
It's just, it's winter term 2015, not 2014.
Oh, 2015. Yeah. Great. Any other comments? Seeing none, I'll call the question, the amendment in this case. All in favor of this amendment, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay? Nay. Abstain? Okay, so carries. And now we return to the discussion about the motion itself. Further comments? Martinez, Landrum, Chartoff, and then Kramer. Charles Martinez, Senator Martinez.
I have two suggestions. One is, I think, and Senator Dreiling referenced this earlier, the language of this being a task force versus a standing committee is important symbolically in terms of the extent to which we think of this as time limited or reactive versus something that really is about the culture. And I don't think that's an arbitrary distinction. So I'm proposing that we add language about this being a standing committee, not a task force. I do think that's important. The second thing I'll just say while I have the microphone, so these are two possible amendments, is that in 2.2, a missing ingredient here, and perhaps it was designed to be captured by the phrase "a member of the university administration," but we have a deep expertise within student affairs of individual staff who every day serve students who are affected by sexual violence. And I'm going to propose that we have 2 additional appointees who are staff who are involved in direct services to students who deal with bias and sexual violence on a daily basis.
For this motion, you're
in
saying?
2.2.
Okay, so you've proposed 2 amendments. We can only do them one at a time. The first amendment, would you please state it so that we can notate it and discuss and vote?
The first is to change task force to standing committee.
Thank you. So what you'll do is maybe correct it the first time, and we know that we don't want to take the time to go through all of them, but you'll know that it carries through. So discussion, please. Standing committee as opposed to task force. I see Sullivan.
I do not want a standing committee on student safety that is appointed.
Please use the microphone. Thank you.
I don't want a standing committee. We got to think about this. You're talking about making a standing committee, and everybody here is appointed by the president. I mean, the president has my trust, but I want a Senate committee for the standing committee. We have a responsibility.
Well,
to the
standing
students.
committee is a Senate committee.
Yes, but appointed by the Senate Exec Committee, not by the president, or maybe some positions. I mean, we've got to think. Right now, we need this committee to act fast. It is a task force. It is appropriate that the president acts quickly to get people on this committee to get it moving. A standing committee, we need to have a little bit more thought about how the membership of that committee is sifted and decided upon. I'm going to be chairing the Committee on Committees, and I guarantee you there will be a motion before this body for a standing committee on student safety. But there's some of the, for example, membership, there's some of the provisions in this which are appropriate for a task force, which would not be appropriate for a standing committee. So I we should keep this a task force. We'll get our standing committee.
Bill Harbaugh, then Cassia Delaboe, then John Bonine.
I agree with Randy. I think it's fine to call this a task force. We need to get this moving, and I don't think this is a substantive amendment.
Cassia Delaboe?
We could make a small amendment somewhere, I'm not sure where it belongs, at which point when the initial work will be done, it will be converted into a standing committee by the appropriate process.
Yeah, we have to vote on this first before we can do that. If you want to propose that next, then we could do that. Okay, John Bonine.
I agree with Cassia Delaboe that there should be a standing committee. I don't agree that it should be part of this motion. The reason is that normally when we involve people outside of the Senate or faculty and so forth, such as administration, we set up task forces. I'm not saying we've been totally consistent, but certainly some of the work I've worked on has been so-called work groups or task forces in which we collaborate with people from the administration and so forth, and I think it's a great thing. To set up a standing committee with appointed or elected members from an NGO, a certain organization on campus, from the administration, we can go back and read what are the other things, and then having it, as was mentioned, appointed rather than elected, I think that's just complex. So I would suggest that this stay as a task force with the understanding that it is the desire of the body to move to a standing committee after, as Randy Sullivan said, we figure out what should be the structure and the elective or appointive nature of such a committee.
Further discussion? Seeing none, I call the question. All in favor of this amendment, please say aye. Aye? Did I hear any? I heard a little aye. No? All opposed, nay. Nay. Okay, so it does not carry. And now there was a second amendment proposed. Do you wish to put it on the floor, or?
I do, but
Yes, Cassia Delaboe.
I'd like to revisit what we just voted on and fix it so that we can all have great intentions and all of us might die today and nobody will remember that we had this idea unless they look at the video. I would like to say the deadline all the way down, I think it's in 2.3. I would like to make the amendment that would say by the second Senate meeting of full, at which time the task force will be converted however the words help me with the word crafting, but at which time the task force will be converted to a standing committee. Will what? Yeah, we'll propose a structure for a standing committee. Because you're right, the task force will discover more people who are involved in this that we're still unaware of, that should be part of this voice. So, at which time the task force will propose a structure for a standing committee.
Okay, discussion on the amendment. Do I see any hands? No. Call the question. All in favor of this amendment, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay? Nay. It carries. Now we return to the discussion about the full motion. There was another proposal for an amendment. Senator Martinez.
I propose adding to 2.2 that the task force include 2 additional members from 2 staff members who provide direct services in bias education and response to sexual violence for students.
Four instead of or. Yeah. Right. Just so you know what she has to do, she has to type there and look here, so it's a little tricky. Open for discussion. Professor Harbaugh.
So I think that this committee would obviously consult with staff with this kind of expertise. And at this point, it's getting to be a pretty large task force. and that we all know what that means in terms of the trouble scheduling meetings and so forth. So I think that we should leave that up to the discretion of the Senate President and the committee as to what kind of input they want to seek.
Further discussion? Professor Dreiling, then Senator Chertoff, and then did I see another hand? No.
Yeah, this actually speaks to the concern I had about workload, and I also hear Senator Harbaugh's concern about expanding or overcomplicating scheduling and other elements of the task force. However, I do think that it's important to have members of the university, of the campus community that are practitioners kind of within the various service directed institutions here at U of O, and that kind of expertise doesn't necessarily get captured by the current layout. I think this broadens the involvement. We get the intellectual and the active kind of passionate support, as well as student support and Senate kind of direction, but having somebody who's involved in direct services, I think, would be a valuable component to the task force, though it will most likely complicate the scheduling a hair. So,
yes, Senator Chertoff.
Okay, I had the same thought, but in my opinion, they ought to be people from outside the campus community who have expertise in dealing with sexual violence and victims of sexual violence.
So if you wanted to make another amendment, it would have to be we'd have to consider this first, but we take your comment into consideration. Further comments? Seeing none, I call the question. All in favor of this amendment, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay? Nay. Abstain? It so carries, and you proposed an amendment. Do you want that to be considered?
I would amend this to say that the two members that we're speaking of here ought to be people from outside the campus community rather than staff members on the campus.
So give us the wording that you would like us to consider.
I'm not sure what kind of wording I'd want to make, but two community members with expertise in dealing with sexual assault and counseling victims of sexual assault or sexual violence, you might say.
Okay, open for discussion. Lisa Raleigh, then Charles Martinez, and then I think I saw, was your hand up, Senator Landrum? Oh, thank you. And then Cassia Delabo. And then John Bonine.
I wonder if this particular issue could be addressed by the two additional nominees recommended by the UOCESB. I'm just raising that as a question because it doesn't specify whether those would be internal or external people.
I think we could look to, I do see some members of that coalition. Would any of the members like to address that? I just am giving you an opportunity to say whether that's even feasible. I think we need some information. It's who would like to speak, please, just so we get some information. And Jennifer Freed, or who? I don't see who's. Oh, sorry. Whoever would like to speak, just so we have information about it. It's been proposed as a possibility, but we don't know if it's even possible.
At this point, I think all the members of that group are UO people. Is that the question? Everybody on that coalition is also a University of Oregon member. Oh.
It says recommended by and not members of. So, now, please.
I'm on that committee, and I think that we would rather just have ourselves, choose from amongst the ones we know on who are involved with that coalition. So I would be against that.
I agree with that as another member.
Great. Okay, so it looks like it's tending toward not considering that from inside the committee. Yes, Senator Martinez.
I actually appreciate the spirit of this. But this is not a proxy for the replacement of expertise from our existing staff. Students, particularly university students, are at a particular place in their own personal development that requires a particular kind of expertise. There is no proxy for that. So I do appreciate the sentiment, which is having outside perspective in this kind of expertise could be very beneficial to the task force. So I'm not opposed to the idea, but I do not at all see it as a proxy for the skill of our student affairs professionals.
Senator Chertoff is the maker of the amendment.
Yeah, the reason I suggested it is because I'm aware from my involvement outside the university that there are people from the university who are seeking help outside the university because they don't feel comfortable seeking it within the university.
Thank you. I think Senator Kramer, then Senator Delaboe, and then John Bonine.
I would agree with what Senator Chertoff just said, that very often victims need help from people outside the university instead of in the university, and so this task force should have that expertise as much as any other expertise. Thanks.
I just have a question. Were you saying, Senator Chertoff, that you wanted that last part to be crossed off, or you wanted to add that to what was presently there? Could you just clarify, just so we're all...
Yeah, I'm substituting.
You're substituting it. Okay, thank you. Senator Delaboe.
Again, in the spirit of the task force being able to move forward more quickly to spearhead this, and having the standing committee be formed in the fall, my thinking would be that the community members would be more appropriately part of the standing committee for the long, sustainable practice to be able to address these types of concerns, which I think are a more long-term consideration. So I would suggest that the motion move that membership into the standing committee verbiage to make sure the community voice is part of the longer range planning.
Okay, that would be another amendment in addition to this one. Professor Bonine and then Senator Harbaugh. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. And then Senator Harbaugh.
Once Cassia speaks, everybody says, well, that makes sense, so why do we have to say anything? However, I do think we should add, it is important, I believe, that members, that staff members who are dealing with this on this campus every day be involved in this. And I'll just say that that Caroline Farrell and I worked on the student conduct code changes, sort of thinking, oh, we're going to do all this sort of radical stuff. And then we spent time with Sandy, and we said, well, actually, we're all pretty much on the same page. And I think that when we work together inside the university, sometimes we find, that our perspectives get shared, and we change, they change, administration, whatever. So I would definitely not want to exclude. I think this should be voted down because it deletes those people from the motion.
Please. And also, please identify yourself and then speak, please.
Hi, I'm Paul Shang. I'm Assistant Vice President, Dean of Students. I would like to speak against what I understand to be the proposed amendment because I do think that there should be university representatives serving on this task force who have the assignment of working with survivors and those reporting instances of sexual misconduct. And one other reason that I'd like to add is because we do our work within the context of Title IX. And Title IX is not something that applies to anything else outside of the university. So our assignment and the kind of work that we do and the responses that we provide are within the context of the federal law.
Okay. Any other hands? Or if seeing none, I will call the question. All in favor of this amendment, please say aye.
Aye.
Nay?
Nay.
It is voted down, and now we go back actually to the motion. I think there was an amendment proposed, if I'm not mistaken, by Cassia, right? Is that what you were intending? Yes.
So I would propose to add to 2.3, at which time task force will propose a structure for a standing committee to include, community members is confusing. Yeah, there you go. But community members, we tend to call U of O community members, so I want to make it clear it's community members, non-UO, or Eugene, Springfield, or Lane County, whatever, to make sure we're not talking U of O community members.
So non-UO, is that what you're...
I don't know how would we say it? I need help. All right, John.
Okay. Great. So discussion on the amendment. Senator Ellis.
I disagree with that because I think that's actually what the task force should be deciding and bringing to us at the time.
Thank you. Anyone else? Other comments? Seeing none, all in favor of the amendment, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, say nay. Nay. It does not carry. Now we return to discussion about the entire motion. Do I see any other hands? First was Senator Weintraub and then Senator Sullivan.
I just have a question for clarification for 2.2. Who is going to be appointed by Senate President, or the whole group? I'm asking for. It's a question to the maker of the motion.
Maker of the motion, Professor Dreiling.
Because it looks like there'll be a lot of people who are determined to be there by somebody else.
All to be appointed by the Senate President. So yes, this Senate President, Rob Kier.
What it means is it has to always be in consultation with the Senate Executive Committee. That's just understood. That it's always discussed with the Senate Exec. So.
Is that all? Was there?
Is that any other
question?
question?
Address your question?
Yes. Thank you.
I just wanted to apologize. Sometimes when I read things,
Senator Kramer.
Sometimes when I read things quickly, I make mistakes. When I was reading through 2.2 before and had my vehement objection to rolling this over in a standing committee, I was reading that as all appointed by the university president. And so I wanted to apologize to you.
Oh, okay. Please.
That's why I was being so vehement about it. I still think it's a good idea to leave it the way it was, but I just wanted to mention that's why I was being so vehement.
Oh, okay. Thank you. And Senator Kramer. Senator Kramer calls the question. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. It carries. And we're now on to the next motion. I'm going to go quickly. Yes? Oh, all in favor, please say aye. Sorry. Aye. Opposed, nay. It carries. Now we can clap. So we go to the next motion, proposed change to student conduct code regarding definition of words. We need a suspension of the rules. Do I hear a motion? Okay. Second? Second. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. It carries, and so now we can discuss it. The maker of the motion is Sandy Weintraub, Director of Student Conduct and Community Standards. So please make the motion, and we'll ask for a second.
I'm not a senator. I don't think I can make the motion.
It comes actually as a seconded motion, I'm told, because it's from the actual committee.
Okay.
So it's fine. So I will read it, and then we'll ask for background. Proposed change to the Student Conduct Code regarding definitions of words. Section 1, 1.1, whereas the Student Conduct and Community Standards Committee has identified a need to revise and update Section 571.021.0100 of the Student Conduct Code entitled Definitions, which outlines the definitions of words commonly used in the code, Section 2, 2.1. Be it hereby moved that the Student Conduct Code be amended to read as follows. 571.021.0100 30. Sexual misconduct means A. Unwanted penetration is penetration of another person or causing the penetration of another person when 1, A, does not first obtain explicit consent from that person, or B, knows or should have known that the person was incapable of explicit consent by reason of mental disorder, mental incapacitation, or physical helplessness. B, non-consensual personal contact occurs when a student subjects another person to contact of a sexual nature when a reasonable person would know that such contact would cause emotional distress. A, without having first obtained explicit consent, or B, when he or she knows or should have known the person was incapable of explicit consent by reason of mental disorder, mental incapacitation, or physical helplessness. Red line student conduct code with proposed changes is below. And then we see financial impact is cost neutral.
Yeah.
And is there any background you would like to give?
Yeah, just letting you know, I'm Sandy Weintraub, Director of Student Conduct and Community Standards from the Dean of Students Office. This is actually a change. All this does is makes the word consent consistent with the way it is in other parts of the code. If you read the definitions in our code, consent is not defined, but explicit consent is. And this is actually something that we do very well in the code. This is something that really is a best practice. We have the term explicit. It makes it very clear to our students that it has to be explicit consent under the definitions found in the code. All this does is in sections where it talks about consent without the word explicit, we are adding the word explicit.
Thank you. Discussion. I see any hands? Senator Kramer.
I want to thank Sandy Weintraub and call the question.
Question is called. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Nay? Abstain? And so carries. Now we vote. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Carries. Now we go to the next, which is proposed change to Student Conduct Code to standard preponderance of evidence. This, again, is being put forward by the committee, and Sandy Weintraub is the convener. Proposed change to the Student Conduct Code to standard of preponderance of evidence. Section 1, 1.1, whereas OCR uses a preponderance of evidence standard in its fund termination administration hearings, thus, in order for a school's grievance procedures to be consistent with Title IX standards, the school must use a preponderance of evidence standard, i.e., it is more likely than not that sexual harassment or violence occurred. The clear and convincing standard, i.e., it is highly probable or reasonably certain that the sexual harassment or violence occurred, currently used by some schools, is a higher standard of proof. Grievance procedures that use this higher standard are inconsistent with the standard of proof established for violations of the civil rights laws and are thus not equitable under Title IX. Therefore, preponderance of the evidence is the appropriate standard for investigating allegations of sexual harassment or violence. And 1.2, whereas the Student Conduct and Community Standards Committee has identified a need to revise and update sections 5710210 140 and 57102102110 of the Student Conduct Code, Section 2, 2.1. Be it hereby moved that the Student Conduct Code be amended to read as follows. 57102101140 Student Rights. 5H. To be considered not responsible for the alleged conduct until proven responsible by a preponderance of the information. 57102102110. University hearings, panel hearings. 16. Allegations of violations of the Student Conduct Code must be established by a preponderance of evidence. There's a redlined version below. The financial impact is cost neutral, and the sponsor is Student Conduct and Committee Standards Committee. Would you like to give background, Sandy?
Yes, thank you. The whereas on the top, I think it's important to understand that is some guidance, and that's the reason why this was a priority of ours to change initially. But I think it's something that I've seen some debate about, and I think it's important to understand. This change is only for sanctioning. For any section of the Student Conduct Code, if a student is charged of that, the burden of proof that you need to find a student responsible is and has been for quite a while in our code preponderance of information. And that is 50% plus a feather is a description that's been used, that I've been heard many times. It's a preponderance. It's more likely than not. That is today for any section of the Student Conduct Code, sexual misconduct or otherwise, the standard that is used for being found responsible. This only changes very specifically the standard that can be used for expulsion as a sanction, and that would be after a student has been found responsible. That's been the only part in the section that in our entire code where clear and convincing came up. So what this does very specifically is to make for both all findings of responsibility under all sections of the Student Conduct Code, not just sexual misconduct, and to find someone, to give someone a sanction that is any sanction available, including expulsion, will now be preponderance of evidence. And that is what this change does. It's only about sanctioning, and it's only about expulsion. Thank you.
Discussion, please. And please identify yourself.
Hi,
just for the
Caroline
thanks.
Farrell, professor at law. I want to make a friendly amendment to University Hearings Panels hearing and change it from preponderance of evidence to preponderance of information, which is consistent throughout the code.
So noted. Discussion?
It's fully supported.
Sandy says it's fully supported. I hear the question being called. All in favor, please say aye. Let me hear that. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay?
Nay.
I'll take a count. All in favor of calling the question, could you put your tents up? 1, 2, 1. It carries. Okay, back to the discussion. Yes, and back to the discussion of the motion. That was calling the whole question, so it has passed. In a vote. So all in favor of information in a vote. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Okay, it passes. Now back to the discussion, please.
My name's Thomas. I'm an undergrad at the University of Oregon. I'm urging the Senate body to vote against this motion because I think that lowering the standard of evidence required for the Student Conduct Code disciplinary measures, I think that this grants power to expel students based only on preponderance of evidence, holding a notion of more likely than not, and that would be a very dangerous action. I think that the implications of the motion aren't being fully considered, and the Education Department's recommendation of lowering the standard of evidence is based on a misunderstanding or a misinterpretation of Title IX. As a student at the university, I think that disciplinary measures such as expulsion should require clear and convincing evidence of wrongdoing instead of only a greater than 50% likelihood. Only a high standard of evidence can ensure the necessary presumption of innocence, due process, and burden of proof that are in place to protect students accused of wrongdoing. I think that the motion hinders progress and due process, and that it's a backwards attempt to ensure that as a campus community we can protect victims of wrongdoing under the Conduct Code. I think that actions are necessary in order to protect students from sexual violence and such as related to this motion, but I don't think that this would be the right steps forward.
Further discussion? Please.
Hi, I'm Shakur Martin. I'm the Assistant Dean of Students, and it's my job at the university to oversee the student conduct process along with Sandy. I appreciate your comments. I think 3 quick points. This has an amendment that's gone through the Conduct Committee, so it has had involvement from students, faculty, and staff at the university who are charged through ASUO with providing student feedback, a really important part of the process. It is specifically outlined in both Title IX and most directly in Title IX and also in the consultant's report. This is an area where we are out of compliance. And I do want to make note, too, that When a student does an administrative conference, they actually are not, unless they waive their right, they're not actually up for expulsion, suspension, or negative notation. So in most cases, that is not a sanction that's even discussed. Only a very small, less than 1% of our cases go to a panel hearing where this would be. A student would actually have to waive their right for those sanctions. So it's a very, very small percentage, and we do take it very seriously. I understand the concerns, but expulsion to us is an extreme sanction, a separation from the university. But we feel compliance with Title IX around our sanctioning is vital, and something that, and the committee put this forward in understanding that it is vital. We also don't want to treat students differently, so we want to make sure that we're equitable in the way we apply our code in doing this. So,
great. Further discussion? Professor Davison?
The only explanation I've heard so far as to why we're doing this is to comply with Title IX. And if we were doing it to comply with Title IX, it doesn't make sense why the change in the burden of proof applies to every expulsion as opposed to just the expulsions that Title IX would be concerned with, sexual assault and things like that. And so it is a significant reduction of due process available to the students, and it should be explained. And the Title IX explanation that shows up at the beginning in the preamble doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I agree that maybe some people in the Civil Rights Office have said that they would prefer that we have a lower standard or burden of proof, but the explanation they give doesn't make any sense. There doesn't need to be, and it doesn't make sense to talk about consistency between the burden of proof that we apply to students who have been accused of wrong and the burden of proof that applies to an institution that's accused of noncompliance with Title IX. An institution's due process interests and rights are very different than an individual's due process and rights. Institution doesn't have a personal reputation that's damaged. An institution doesn't get expelled. An institution doesn't have to go to a new school and potentially go there for an extra 2 years. They're apples and oranges. And so there can be no consistency between the burden of proof that applies to an institution and the one that applies to accused individuals.
Further discussions, please?
Yeah, thank you. I just want to add to that
please identify yourself just for the record.
Peter Warnick, Senator.
Thank you.
The recent rulemaking session that just ended for the Department of Education has actually rescinded the preponderance mandate. So the claim that compliance with Title IX hinges on changing the standard of proof is basically coming from that department, and that department has changed its position. So it's a minor point, really, about the issue of expulsion versus the entire student conduct code, but it seems to me that we should actually take seriously that the Department of Education, because of the heavy criticism that preponderance mandate received when the letter was released from the OCR, has actually changed its position.
Senator Kramer, and then Professor Bonine, and then Senator Ellis.
I just want to say that while some schools require clear and convincing, many schools don't. And the reasons for that is that you're building a community on a campus that has a higher standard for conduct and you're not sending people to prison for rape. You're just saying that you have to behave even better than that. And that's the point of this motion. And I know many schools have this higher standard just in order to promote that. So while I agree expulsion is not required of a clear and convincing finding, it's allowed. And this allows for a community to set higher standards. That's why this is an important motion. And it happens at many universities.
Professor Bonine?
I think it's important to understand that this is not prison. This is not a fine. This is not about criminality. The code is about educating students And when truly necessary, its most serious sanctions are about protecting the university community against serious misbehavior by a particular student. The community has the right to achieve that protection without the processes that will be applicable, for example, to criminal law or some other fields, because the community has the right to remove from the University of Oregon's educational program a student who commits serious plagiarism, fraud, or exhibits violent behavior, for example. This is community protection. That student can continue the education elsewhere. I understand that there is a burden when this happens, but it's also important to note that there is a duty of the university to prove by a preponderance of the information. It's not that the student must prove that he or she did not do something by a preponderance. There is still, the burden is on the university to show this. It's not clear and convincing. It's not beyond a reasonable doubt. That's true. But the notion is that the community has decided, and it would be, from the statistics that have been said here, 1% of the cases and then some small, tiny percent of that. It's going to be a rather extreme situation. And if we believe that our process, including the appeal process, is going to just arbitrarily be throwing people out of here because of a difference in standard, I think that's, okay, I won't use the word that I want to use. I think that's just wrong. And I do think that this is a modest change, and it's a change that puts us in accordance with good practices, and it's not a big threat to anybody except those who pose a threat to the integrity or safety in the community.
Senator Ellis and then Senator Vaintrobe.
So personally, I don't feel ready to vote on this. Can we delay the vote until our next meeting? And I know that means after the summer.
Well, you'd have to make a...
I can't remember how to do that.
Okay. Our parliamentarian is right there. He will tell you exactly what to do. Please don't lean against the lights. That's why you have to... That's why they went out.
I move to postpone until the next meeting.
Okay, she moves to postpone until the next meeting, which would be the first meeting in October. Second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay?
Nay.
May I see the name tents, please? The ayes first. 9. Only 9 ayes, so it does not carry. Okay, we may. Nays, please. Yes, it does not carry. So back to discussion. Oh, yes, please. Thank you.
I'm Deb Mylander. I'm an officer of administration here and an alumni. So as I'm listening to this discussion, when I consider these types of changes, I want to think of a totally different scenario and not the one that is so emotionally charged right now. So let's say there's a protest and some vandalism that happens and causes damage and perhaps some incidental physical harm. And it's more likely than not that...
Please speak into the mic. Thank you.
Sorry. And it's more likely than not that John did it. So somebody's sitting in a room balancing the preponderance of evidence on who is the person that committed that protest, that vandalism, that physical harm. And if this is the standard that's being used, it gives me concern. I understand the emotional issues at hand and why there's an urgent need to do something. I just find it uncomfortable that this is being proposed in a fast-track manner.
Chikora Martin, please. I think she wants to give some supporting evidence.
I've done student conduct here for over 10 years. I have expelled 4 people at the University of Oregon related to that, and would never expel a student for that kind of behavior. It would be unethical and completely antithetical to our educational mission. And I think that's important because what we're asking is, you're asking professionals who do this for a living. Our main goal is to actually keep students here. To be honest, that's why we do the work every day. And expulsion is a situation where it's a health and safety risk. Would we expel a student if we felt they posed an ongoing safety risk to a campus community? We may, and that's the point. Would I expel a student who needs to learn about personal property and the impact they have on someone else? No. I want to keep that student here to give them educational sanctions, an opportunity to learn, and an opportunity to contribute to our community. So I think what we're asking is you have to, as we trust all of you to educate our students in the classroom, you have to trust the professionals who do this for a living to know that that does not suit our university community and would be antithetical and unethical in the work we do at the university.
Senator Davidson and then Senator Vaintrub.
I still have a few concerns. One is that I don't know you, but I do trust you. More importantly, I don't know who you'll be replaced by. I assume you're not immortal. I assume our president is not immortal. And when we write these rules and we design policies, we don't just design them out of an idea of trust in whoever happens to occupy the position, but we write them to ensure that those people will continue to behave in a trustworthy fashion. We write them for the worst of us as well as the best of us. And coming back to the language that we're talking about, the standard that exists now is clear and convincing. That's all that's required, is that before you expel somebody, it's clear that they did what they were accused of. It's convincing. And what we're saying now is, no, it doesn't really need to be clear. It doesn't really need to be convincing. If we could flip a coin and by a feather, that was the language that was used, we think maybe they did it. That's good enough. We'll kick them out. And maybe I'm okay with that if, in fact, we have language in our code that says you cannot be expelled except for serious threats to health and safety. If that's written there, then I haven't read all the way through it. I've read through everything that everybody showed me so far, and I haven't seen that. And so that might be the standard that you apply. Somebody else might decide, well, somebody was dealing drugs, and by gosh, we're tough on drugs, and so we're going to expel them. We're going to make a point. Or somebody might have been engaged in some marginal infraction, but they've made political enemies, and we're going to expel them. And I'll stop.
Okay, Senator Vaintrub, and then Jennifer Fried.
Yeah, I have mixed feelings. When I first read this amendment, I thought it's just a technical issue, but now I'm asking myself why we're doing this now. And it sounds like we're supposed to do something in response to the events of recent month. And from what I hear, I don't see how this is going to address this issue of sexual violence and if it's such a tiny proportion of people who are going to be affected by this change. And I hear, again, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not an expert, I haven't read the student code, I didn't even know where to read it till, a few days ago. And I feel that we are all, I don't think I'm alone here, that we're all kind of rushed into doing something which is important and has, maybe unforeseen kind of consequences, which is essentially has no reason to be done so quickly. So I was suggesting to postpone this motion till fall so that we could all study this. But if it's not going to happen, I'm going to vote against it, and I suggest everyone do that, because I feel that we're given some document which nobody really vetted well, and even people who read it giving different conflicting evidence. One question I actually would like to be told about. Somebody made this exception to begin with. Why expulsion required high standard of evidence? Nobody addressed this issue. It was done, it was placed in the code before. Now we're kind of happy, not but those who are supporting this, happy to get rid of it. Is it because of Title IX or because of some new kind of scientific evidence from the law business? I would like to be given this information and be given time to study this. So that's my take on this. I think there's no real need to do this so quickly.
Yeah, I believe the maker of the motion would like to make a clarifying comment, then Jennifer Fry.
So I just want to respond directly to a couple things. Number one, this motion was actually passed by a meeting of the Student Conduct Committee that was passed by a majority of that committee prior to the current discussion that's going on around sexual misconduct on campus. This was passed at a meeting that took place on April 10th. This is a meeting that this specific motion was one that has been in the works for quite a while, based off the guidance that came from the Office of Civil Rights to the Department of Education. While I hear you, the guidance that we have received at this point is not that. It is that we are out of compliance, and that we do have student conduct cases that are going through our system consistently. And if this was not changed now, we believe with our guidance we have received that we are out of compliance with that. But I just think it's clear this motion was not in response to the current discussion. This was a motion that was passed by the committee. It was brought to the committee. Prior to that, these discussions that we're having as a group happened in that committee. There was absolutely student representation there. There was representation from advocates who represent students on campus. They brought up these specific issues, and we agree that expulsion is, I just want to say it personally again, because Shakur and I are the two who make these decisions often. It is a remarkably difficult decision to even advocate for an expulsion of a student. I wouldn't work at a university if I didn't feel there was an incredible value to do everything we possibly could to keep students on campus in almost any conceivable circumstance. Shakura said in her career here, it's been 4 people. I've now worked in student conduct for 5 years, and I've only expelled 2 people in my entire career at different institutions. It's something that we fight to keep people on campus, and it's something that, and another clarification as well, is that the only time that conceivably an expulsion would even be considered is if a student had chosen to go to a panel hearing heard by the University Hearings Board, which is appointed by this Senate, and they would be the ones to be making that determination of sanction. Unless a student it would be extraordinarily rare the student would actually waive that right to go to the hearing where expulsion was available. It's something that Shakura said earlier, and I think it's important to understand. If a student chooses an administrative conference, in the majority of cases, me as the hearings officer, I cannot expel a student in that case. I cannot suspend a student in that case. That is specifically forbidden by the code. And there is actually guidance in the code. There's not specific rules, but there is guidance and language in the code that says that sanctions that take people away from campus, like suspensions, like expulsions, should only be used in cases that involve health and safety, and they're those that are most serious. It's guidance, but it is there. Thank you.
Thanks. Jennifer Fry.
Yeah, I would just like to correct some misinformation. So in April, there's been claims that the OCR has changed their stance, but the last official document I'm aware of is from April 29, 2014. It's from the United States Department of Education, Office of Civil Rights, and it's questions and answers on Title IX and sexual violence. And in that document on page 33 of 53 pages, it says very clearly, a balanced and fair process that provides the same opportunities to both parties will lead to sound and supportable decisions. Specifically, and then the second one down, the school must use a preponderance of the evidence, i.e. more likely than not standard in any Title IX proceedings, including any fact findings and hearings. And I can make this link available to everybody. Just one other point, which is that I do think it's urgent because the way we keep campus safe is by having exactly this sort of clarity about what a safe campus and a safe community will consist of.
There were 3 other hands. First, yes, Professor Hyatt, and then your hand, and then Professor Kramer.
I just wanted to make it clear that it's a Senate committee, the Student Conduct Code, the people that worked on the Student Conduct Code, and I know that they've been working on it for over a year, longer, yeah. I'm not on that committee, but it's the committee that we asked to work on this long before any of this happened that are recommending the preponderance of information. Thanks.
Please.
I just wanted to address a clarification. The idea that a student doesn't actually have the, it's impossible that they'll be expelled unless they choose to attend a hearing instead of an administrative conference is a little misleading, I think, because it's my understanding that when in violation of the Student Conduct Code, you're given the option between the administrative conference or a hearing. But it's a tough situation for the accused student because the administrative conference doesn't allow for an appeal to the disciplinary action, whereas if choosing a hearing that would allow for expulsion, you would also be allowed that appeal process. And that's just my understanding. I'd also just like to mention that if expulsion is so rare, I don't think it would be ridiculous to require a clear and convincing standard of evidence under the idea that these expulsions don't happen very often. And if they are so carefully considered, then you would think a clear and convincing standard of evidence wouldn't be ridiculous. I don't understand why our university wouldn't hold our internal judicial system to the same standards as the United States legal system does with the clear and convincing standard of evidence. And someone mentioned earlier that the motion needs to pass in order to hold our university to a higher standard. And that seems a little ironic to me because I'll remind you that we're advocating here for a lower standard of evidence. And I just think the motion goes directly against the cornerstone of due process, that being presumption of evidence, while it does this isn't presumption of guilt. It's certainly not presumption of innocence when you're a feather above 50%. And then just to address the Title IX misinterpretation that I spoke of earlier, because I'm certainly not a lawyer or a pre-law student even or anything of the sort, but it's my understanding that students can't be sued under Title IX. Only institutions can be sued under Title IX. So it's my understanding that when Title IX addresses preponderance of evidence, it's only to be used when holding schools and universities accountable for things like inaction. I don't think preponderance of evidence was ever intended to be used in light of expelling a student. And then one last note on that, because several people mentioned that expulsion is not nearly as damning as a criminal record, and that the university can use a lower standard of evidence because we're not throwing someone in jail. I think that that idea is not really looking at the effects of expulsion and sort of the permanent record of expulsion on a conduct record for a student. I think that has a lifelong effect on a student to almost the same degree as a criminal conviction.
Is there did I see a clarifying? No. Professor Kramer?
Okay, so I'm going to just explain why a community like the University of Oregon, I've learned a lot in the last few weeks that public universities actually can have a higher standard. I got educated at a liberal arts schools, and they all hold higher standards for student conduct than basically large universities do. But then I learned that's not completely true. You can actually have very high standards for community behavior. And this is how you do it, this passage right here. And what you're choosing between, just to make it perfectly clear, me and many others, and a lot of faculty as well as students, are survivors who transferred away from the university because they couldn't prove clear and convincing. And what you want to do to protect community standards is say a preponderance of evidence, because we're not sending people to jail, but you're expelling all survivors from the university's community almost completely if you don't hold it to a higher standard. And that's what this vote is about. And this has been in the works a long time. And I learned we could do this here, and we should do this now.
Yes. Senator Warnock was next. And then I think there was another hand here. Thank you. Senator Sullivan.
I'm all in favor of high standards of conduct and holding people to a higher standard. I think what we're discussing here is how to decide guilt or innocence. And so there can't be, the question is, what is the presumption of guilt and the standard that would determine that? And I'm also not even necessarily arguing against the motion, But I think we should be clear about the reasons for doing so and the reasons for passing the motion if we are going to pass it. And I don't think that Title IX makes any sense here as an argument. So I wanted to follow up. There was a claim that about misinformation, but this is from the Higher Ed Journal reporting on the rulemaking session from the Department of Education. The draft regulation approved Tuesday also scrapped a controversial effort by the Education Department to require campus sexual assault proceedings to adhere to guidance issued by the department's Office for Civil Rights. In 2011, that office told colleges they must use a preponderance of the evidence standard for such proceedings, a lower threshold than the clear and convincing standard that many institutions have been using. So that was just at the end of April that regulation was passed. So obviously the documents from OCR wouldn't be up to date, but that is coming through, and that attests to the fact that the Department of Education is rethinking their own mandate. They've actually rescinded that mandate. So if we pass it, let's not do it because we are attempting to comply with Title IX. Let's do it for whatever reason we decide to do it for. I'm not even arguing against it, but it's not because of Title IX. Thank you.
Senator Sullivan, then Senator Davidson, then Professor Bonine, then Weintraub.
We've got kind of a polarized situation here. And if I can, it seems to me that we have people that, and by the way, Jane, thank you so much for speaking and contributing that. I hear you. We've got people who want to make sure that this is a safe place for survivors, and there's a lot of them. They need it. They need that security. But I'm also hearing some voices very strongly supporting our tradition of protecting students to have due process. Parliamentarian, can I make a motion to return to committee? Okay. I would like to thank everyone on this committee. You've done fabulous work. Students, we are hearing your voices. May I suggest that we send this back to you and you rewrite it with the idea that it needs to be more focused. There need to be guaranteed that this lower standard is only used when there is a clear and present threat to the community. The charges are of a nature of such that they present a clear and present threat, however you choose to word it, so that due process is protected while maintaining safety for the community. That may be a way forward for both of us, where the concerns of both groups get addressed. I know we want action now. I know we do. But we've got to protect both the interests of both groups. They're both legitimate. And so I make that motion to return this to committee.
Okay, and I can call without discussion, is that correct? First a second, of course. Yes, second. Yep. So I'm going to call it without discussion in this case. How many are in favor? Yes?
I think you need to vote in order to close debate. I actually have something to say about this, but if the body votes to close debate, you can do it without discussion. Otherwise, I certainly have something to say about that particular.
Okay, so does the body vote to close discussion? All in favor, please say aye. Nay?
No, you don't want to do that.
Okay. The parliamentarian disagrees with you, Professor Bonine.
Regardless, people didn't want to close discussion. They voted against it. You vote on the motion.
Right. Okay, we've got it. Thank you. So, right, we've got it. We've got it. Thank you so much. Yes. So we have discussion. Professor Bonine.
I'm actually very concerned about returning it to committee for a couple of reasons. The first was the comment that we have heard from students. I agree. We've heard from one or two students who are concerned with changing the standard. We have not heard from the students who will not speak. We've not heard from the students who are in fear. We've not heard from the students who want a clearer standard and who are worried about their own personal safety on this campus. So I simply, first of all, question whether there's a student movement to stop changing this. There were students on the committee, and those students voted in favor of this change. The problem, it seems to me, is that if you really want a different standard in order to, as the undergraduate indicated, to worry about one's career, one's future, it does go on the record. What also goes on the record is suspension. What also goes on the record is a notation on your transcript. And all of those are according to preponderance of the evidence. So if you really want a clear and convincing standard, then I suggest you come back in the fall and argue that all of the sanctions that are, in some way, let's say, punitive, that are not merely writing a journal or something, that all of those sanctions that might go on your record should not be adopted by a preponderance of the evidence. But this campus does, for those sanctions which do stick with you, take that standard. So I'm simply suggesting sending this back to the committee, a committee that has worked on this, is the wrong action. It's clear that the task force will confront a lot of issues. It's clear that a standing committee will be set up. It's clear that things can be changed again. But at this point of time, it seems to me that there's no particular reason not to rationalize all of our standards, expulsion, notation on transcript, suspension, with the same standard. That's why I would oppose sending it to committee.
Yes. Senator Martinez, then Senator Healy.
I also oppose sending this back to the committee. I think it's essential that the Senate act. I think someone actually reflected earlier that this conversation was reflected in a very careful process that this committee went through, engaging students and one another at the behest of the Senate. So we may be experiencing the echoes of this complicated conversation on campus, but that doesn't mean that we'll ever get to a point where we agree fully, that we have a complete common ground. In fact, maybe the tension around this is exactly what should be in the conversation, that there should always be a tension on the other side of this. But regardless of Title IX, regardless of the legal standard, this really is about the community we intend to create, the norms we intend to have. This is a powerful statement that has had very careful process. So I'm in opposition to the motion to send this back and in favor of us acting.
Senator Healy.
I'm on that committee, and I'm one of the co-chairs of the Student Conduct and Community Standards Committee. It has duked this out, I assure you, in an extended process. The student members on that committee are not shy about promoting a student viewpoint on this. The reason that it is here is because there were students on the committee and staff members who are highly protective of students, who are willing to agree to it. So I would say that sending it back to the committee is probably not going to change a lot. We could possibly come back by saying, in sexual violence cases, there is a higher standard. But I think that once it has come out of the committee, it has come out of a rigorous, grueling, extensive, long-winded discussion. And it probably has been really, really thoroughly discussed.
Senator Delabo.
Thank you for that. And you really bring up an important point. If we're going to function as a Senate and as a shared governance, we have to trust that our committees are doing the work. And when they come to us with motions, they've spent a lot of time. I've been on committees. We've spent a ton of time on things. And we are building trust in the fact that if we're going to function, we have to give committees the work to do. And when they come to us, we have to have the faith that they did due diligence and they worked hard and that there was proper representation. And we can vote on this, move it forward, and next year we're not all going to disappear. This issue is not going to disappear. We can modify it and improve it as we move through trying to make this a sustainable change.
Are you calling the motion?
Yeah, I'm calling the motion.
Okay. After a second. Yes? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay? Okay, so carries. We go back to discuss. Yes, now we're voting on the motion. That's what I'm saying. All in favor, please say aye.
You're voting on the motion. We're about to vote down my motion.
That's what we're voting on, is his motion. We're clear. Thank you. All in favor, please say aye.
What was the motion?
Please restate it. To send it back to the committee.
Don't vote for this one, vote for the next one.
We were calling the question, now we're voting on the motion. All in favor, please say aye. Opposed, nay. Nay. So we're against the motion. Exactly. Professor Davison.
To move to amend.
He's moving to amend.
At the red line version of 021-01405H, after that first sentence, I'd like to add the words, except in cases involving alleged sexual assault, comma, and then restore. If expulsion is a possibility, the standard of proof must be clear and convincing information. And then we would lower the standard of proof for sexual assault, but leave it as it was for everything else. And then I'd do the same thing basically for 0210 section 16. Basically, we would change it so that this motion would create a lower standard of review for sexual assault, so that we would address concerns like those raised by Professor Kramer, that people wouldn't feel like they had to leave the university in that particular circumstance. But in general, we would maintain our tradition of having a slightly higher standard of review for expulsion. Not a criminal standard of review, not beyond reasonable doubt, but a compromise standard, which is what we've had.
Please, Chikora Martin. Clarifying remark.
I'm glad you brought this up. This actually was an exact conversation that the committee had. They did discuss this as an option. And the reason they did not put that forward is because they felt that while sexual assault and sexual acts of sexual violence are terrible acts, that the definition of sexual assault is very specific in our code, and just because I'm not in a relationship with someone or that would fall under that, and I assault someone, I beat them up, I cause physical violence of a safety issue, that they would then be held to a different standard than those of sexual assault, and they really did feel that created a double standard in some ways, but we would not be able to then hold an individual who physically assaults someone because it didn't fall under sexual assault with the same care and ethic around safety and security on our campus. It also, when we talk about best practice, and one of the elements is reviewing the code around best practice that this group is charged with, one model, one code process is where the expectation is, because we don't want to create a situation where this code is unclear or more difficult. And just going back to reminding that this is just around the standard of evidence around the expulsion piece, but the committee did review this thoroughly. In fact, this was almost an entire part of a conversation for the committee, and they did feel this was the most appropriate thing to put forward.
Thank you. Further discussion? So I will call the amendment. All in favor of the amendment, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Nay. And we go back to discussion of the entire motion. Pedro Garcia Caro. Pedro calls the question. We have a second. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Nay. Now we will vote on the motion. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Nay. So carries. Now I would like to ask the body if you wish to extend the meeting. Yes? We are going to do that, but not yet. I'm asking to extend the meeting. May I have a vote? How many vote to extend the meeting, please? Hold your tent. to a definite time of, we need a lot of time, I will say 5:30 at the moment, to 5:30. We have a reception following, and there are some time limits. All in favor, please raise your hands. Opposed? Hands. And abstain, and we are carried. We will go to 5:30. I will now announce the results of the election. Randy Sullivan, 31, and Christopher Phillips, 2. So Randy is our new president-elect. Right. So I'm going to let you, because I haven't had. Lisa is going to give us an announcement about the reception afterwards and about the award winners.
So I just want to say, because we invited our award winners and some of their colleagues and supervisors here for the reception starting at 5. And I'm not really sure how. I'm not sure that they can stay. So I don't know what to do about that. Sorry. I just wanted to let everybody know, because I can see that you guys are out there.
Is this an issue with our award winner, for our award winners? Are they here? I was not aware. We have the food here. They're in the room. Okay. No, we need to go on and actually finish the meeting. And what we'll try to do is, I need to hear from the award winners whether they need to give their remarks prior to 5:30. That's what we don't know. Does any of the award winners need to give his? You would need to give yours before. Right. So why don't we? Shall we ask the body, if now given this new information, whether you? Why don't we extend one more? We could do one more item on the agenda, and then we'll go right to the reception. So. Actually, that's going to take a long time. That's the proposed change to Student Conduct Code to extend jurisdiction off campus. I think I'll ask for the advice of the body. How many would vote to go now to the reception instead of continuing the meeting, knowing the issues at hand, now that we are aware of all of these issues? How many would vote to go right to the reception now rather than continue the meeting? To the reception? Okay. And how many vote against that and continuing? That means voting to continue the meeting. So we continue the meeting, and thank you, Lisa, for bringing that to our attention. The next motion is proposed change to Student Conduct Code to extend jurisdiction off campus. And the maker of the motion is the Student Conduct and Community Standards Committee. I'm assuming that's you again, Sandy. I think in this case we can do that just to show what that is, since we're in an extension of time. So in this particular case, I'm going to ask if everybody would please just read the screen. We'll give you a minute. And normally we would not do this, but in this special case we will. Following the reading of the motion, we'll have some background information, and then we'll have discussion.
Hi.
Great, please.
So again, Sandy Weintraub, Director of Student Conduct Community Standards. This is another motion that was passed by the Student Conduct Committee. I want to make that very clear. This has gone through. This is a specific topic that the Student Conduct Committee has been working on for a very long time. Anyone who has been involved in that process would know that. Again, just want to make it clear this is a long-term issue, and there are very clearly some parts that respond to sexual misconduct, but this again is not only about sexual misconduct. And specifically, as you can read, there are some key changes. What this allows us to do, most importantly, is respond to our students in the reality that they live in a community here in Eugene. That our students live in a community in our state, in our country, etc. And just because a student leaves the exact boundary of campus does not mean that they have the responsibility to be a good citizen, a good community member, someone who and that's what the Student Conduct Code is designed to do. It's a code of community standards. It's a code of things that our community has developed to encourage an educational opportunity. And that's what we see the code. It's an educational and developmental process. And what this change allows us to do is work with students who may be in violation of the Student Conduct Code, but the conduct took place off campus in an educational and developmental manner in a way that currently we're not allowed to. This is a section that has been worked on considerably by many areas. There are many members of our faculty and senators who I see here today who have supported this for years, and I'm happy to answer any questions as well.
We proceed to discussion. Do I see any hands? Professor Bonine, and then Malcolm Wilson. Yes, yes, please. Professor Bonine asks you to speak first.
I'm statutory faculty, not a senator here, though I'm sitting in the wrong section. I have been chair of the Student Conduct Committee before, for one session. I find that this important new proposal my involvement in it comes at an odd time. I've been involved with this for years and years, and my first involvement with it is as a member of a resident of the South University neighborhood. And so as you can see, we've come at it from a much longer history, but one which intersects with the current circumstances quite obviously, I think. We've been subject in the near-campus neighborhoods to a large increase in student population, and that has affected the long-term residents mainly through disruptive parties. And we have encouraged the university to extend the student conduct code so that the kind of conduct that would be expected on campus would be expected throughout the community. Now, as a neighborhood leader, so to speak, I have engaged, and we all have engaged, the authorities in our community, the University of Oregon, the City of Eugene, Lane County, the Eugene Police Department, in efforts to bring livability into our neighborhood. And I wonder if I could ask Lisa to scroll to some of my information. I don't want to dwell long on this, and I apologize for my lengthy remarks. But I do want to point out that I have an amendment to make, and it is simply the insertion in subsection A there, adversely and significantly affects the learning and living environment. That is, I'm proposing to add 2 words, and living. The reason is that the extension of the Student Conduct Code off campus in the conditions stated in A, as it is presently proposed, would only come into play when learning was actually affected. A complainant would have to say to the to the Office of Student Conduct, my learning was impaired. That is to say, if they were listening to their music and were disrupted by a neighbor party, they would, and they weren't actually learning at that time, then the extension of the Student Conduct Code wouldn't come into effect. So, I wonder if we can scroll quickly down, and I just want to indicate to the senators the breadth of the support for this measure. This is a statement from Kitty Piercy. I'm in support of extending jurisdiction of the conduct code off campus. Continue down. The Chief of Police, Pete Kearns, same thing. These are all on the web for your for the consideration. Finally, Municipal Judge Wayne Allen, who's responsible for the municipal court system. And there are undersigned support from UO faculty, from about 24 faculty who live in the close university neighborhood, who support this measure and this amendment.
Thank you. Further discussion? Professor Bonine.
Can you go back to the main motion there? Wherever the heck it is. You know, the track changes, the red, black thing that people are actually voting upon.
He's made an amendment, so we're now discussing.
Was there an amendment in a second?
We need a second first.
Wait a minute. Amendment proposed by a senator and seconded by a senator?
That's what we need. Yeah, second, and now we can discuss it.
So can you describe that amendment change?
He said to add "and living." That was an amendment that he made.
Okay, I have nothing to say.
Yeah. Okay. Further, Senator Healy and then Senator Davidson, then Professor Bonine.
So I'm speaking now not as a member of the Student Conduct Committee, but as someone who has thought about the root causes of some of our issues with the sexual violence and other things. And part of the root cause, as I live in West University, which has about 40 non-renters and maybe 80 non-students out of 6,000 people. So I live surrounded by students, and the sense of the right to do whatever you want once you're off campus, I think, is part of the root cause of the issues that we have with behavior, with sexual violence, with other things, because once you're off campus, there are no rules. Putting it into the Student Conduct Code is not immediately going to make every student living off campus go, oh dear, I'm going to be in trouble with the Student Conduct Code. But it does give the university a way of saying, let's talk about this. Let's try to make you be a better resident, but also that being a good person extends to where you live and not just where you are learning. And that's why I strongly support this idea of the living environment, because I think this is where we start to get at the root causes of really nasty behavior by the smaller things, that I have a right to drink and party and throw up on my neighbor's lawn, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And let's not give people the sense that they have the right to do it just because it's off campus.
Senator Davidson, then Senator Martinez. Professor Bonine, then Senator Martinez.
Yeah, I support the gist of this. I particularly recognize the need for the university to take what effort it can to control the energy that spills out from the university into the surrounding neighborhoods, and also the need to deal with sexual violence and similar issues that happen outside of campus that end up carrying back over into campus. I'm a little bit concerned about what the limits are here on the sort of, arguably, the paternalism we're exercising. In particular, I'm thinking if a student, let's say a graduate student, leaves and goes home to Minnesota or wherever for vacation, for break, and they decide to smoke pot in their home, they couldn't do that here on campus. And technically, they're in violation. Because what we're saying is that all of the Student Conduct Code follows them everywhere, all the time, for the most part, regardless of whether it affects the campus directly or not. Or if they engage in consensual conduct with people who don't even necessarily have to be students. And if the shoe were reversed, if we were applying this to faculty, people would be kind of concerned. I know that because when I was bargaining for the union, The university advocated a position much like this that would apply to faculty, that you were going to be liable for following university standards all the time when you were gone, and you could be punished in terms of employment for failing to. And faculty did not like that at all. Their idea was once you're off campus, to some degree, you should be free. And the students, most of them, are adults. So that's all.
Professor Bonine?
I appreciate your comments, Professor Davidson. I want to just respond directly that a key part of that I think protects specifically what you're talking about is the phrase adversely and significantly affects the learning and or living environment. It has to, that is something that we take into account, that the action would have to adversely and significantly affect before we could even possibly take jurisdiction. Another key here is that this is not mandatory jurisdiction. This is something that in the majority of cases, I know there's a section about sexual misconduct, which is on the other, which you can see where it would be mandatory jurisdiction in this particular motion. But for every other type of offense, we would consider all of the categories, specifically whether that conduct adversely and significantly affected the campus. So the example you use, I can tell you as a conduct practitioner and professional, that is not something we would take jurisdiction over. On a second note, the majority of our sanctions in the majority of our cases are meant to be educational. We consider ourselves part of the educational process. It is best practice, and the reason, again, I said it before, the reason I do this is because I want students to succeed. I consider myself an educator as much as anything else. When I have a student who is not being a good citizen in their community, who is having effect on their neighbors, I think it's actually a much more positive experience to have a one-on-one meeting with that student, to talk about that with the context of the university, to have and to give instead of a penalty being a crime, instead of a violation, instead of a fine, instead of going to jail and the worst consequences. What we're going to give is an opportunity to learn about why it's an effect on a community. We're giving the opportunity to truly learn from that. And again, this is not even a case often. These are also cases that are ripe for using things like alternative dispute resolution, like using other things that our office has there as well. So it's ripe for education, and it's a very important aspect of it.
Further discussion? Yes, Senator Martinez.
I don't know if this is a friendly amendment to the amendment, but I actually heard Sandy reference my point, which is, given the petitioner's argument, and doesn't quite do it either, and so I'm thinking it should say and or living, because this actually makes it more complicated. It says learning and living both have to be affected. So, and or.
Professor Wilson is in favor of it. I think we can accept it as a friendly amendment. If there's no objection, which I'm not hearing any. So, okay. I hear we would like to call the question on the amendment. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Now let's vote on it. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Okay, so carries. I think we're going to now take some time to celebrate our... Oh, we have to vote on the amendment. I'm sorry. Who wants to call the question? Okay, thank you. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. And now we can celebrate. Okay, we have one. Yes, Professor Delabo.
I really want to alert people to the unattended to motions. I think they're very important motions. Yes. In particular, campus planning motion, I just want to advocate that you take a careful look at that, because there are things happening in terms of development that we really need to pay attention to, happening very quickly, and I really urge everyone to read carefully the unattended to motions, and I'm not sure what we can do about it, since, is this our last meeting?
This is our last meeting.
Right.
We'll be in touch very soon about all of these things, but we're right up against the time. Yes? The question was called and we voted on it, and now we have to vote on the motion. So all in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. So it carries. Yes?
I hate to do this, but I propose we have another Senate meeting. I don't know.
Okay, we'll consider the possibility of another Senate meeting, but we will be in touch soon about that. Would everybody please stay for the reception to honor our distinguished award winners, and please congratulate them. Thank you all for coming today, and thank you for working so hard on these motions.